It's the 24th of February 2022. Russian tanks are preparing to cross the border into Ukraine, launching the full-scale invasion that Kyiv continues to resist today. At the same time, something is happening in space. Something silent and invisible, but with important consequences on Earth. A cyber attack strikes satellite providers in Europe and Ukraine, impacting telecommunication systems across the continent. Internet outages and disruptions to energy infrastructure catch many by surprise, leaving Ukraine's military services without internet communication. The satellite service targeted is Geosat, operated by the US-based company Geosat. On the 10th of May, both the European Union and the US attributed the attack to Moscow. While some analysts argue that the attack had limited direct military impact, it reminded the world of something critical. Space is not only about science, it's also a battlefield. Welcome to Euronews Tech Talks, the podcast that explores the digital, technological, and scientific landscape shaping Europe. I'm your host, James Thomas. Today, we dive into the world of space defense. If you're interested in politics and especially European developments, you probably know this is a hot topic on the Brussels agenda. If you're more drawn to the scientific side of space, don't worry. As always, we'll also dig into the technical details. In this episode, we'll explore the role of satellites in space defense. How do they contribute to this sector? What challenges do they face? To answer these questions, we'll speak with experts from different fields. So, make yourself comfortable, grab yourself a cup of tea, and let's begin. A satellite is anything that orbits a planet or a star. Satellites can be natural, like the moon, or man-made machines, like the ones we'll focus on in this episode. Satellites can be placed in different orbits around the Earth, and they can have different functions. Earth observation satellites monitor climate change and provide weather forecasting data. Navigation satellites enable services such as Google Maps. And telecommunications satellites provide access to the internet. Satellites get into space via rocket, and countries launching objects into space must register them with the United Nations. So, until this point, very easy, right? Nothing we haven't previously discussed in other episodes, like number 42 on Earth observation and numbers 46 and 47 on biomass. However, things become more complicated when we consider that there are also other types of satellites, such as military satellites. Since they operate for the armed forces, their activities are more mysterious, and it's sometimes more difficult to track them. A particularly secretive category of military satellites is spy satellites.
Spy satellites are a very important category because they basically try to acquire information, and mainly images, but also registration of electronic signals and communication of enemies, of potential enemies, or also some competitors, let's say, potential competitors.
This is Luciano Anselmo, a researcher at the Institute for Information Science and Technology at the Italian National Research Centre in Pisa.
They can be subdivided in a few main categories. The most ancient and the most important still today are the reconnaissance satellite using imaging cameras sensitive to the visible light or also to infrared light that are able to take snapshot of the overflown territories, sending these images back to the owners. The cameras are just electronic cameras, CCD cameras, with very high resolutions. Typically, we can say that top military spacecraft used for this kind of mission have a resolution basically around 10 centimeters per pixel. But in extreme cases, of course, all this information is classified, so we are making just deduction based on the law of physics. but we can say that probably the best atoll can reach around 5 centimeter per pixel of resolution. Then the infrared sensors, infrared camera, they have a little bit less resolution, but are very important because, of course, they can see hot things at night. They can see different things with respect to visible light. And finally, there are a more recent development that is synthetic aperture radar images. Radar images are the advantages that are all-weather imaging system. That is, when there is a cloud cover, visible imaging is impossible because the target is covered by clouds, but radar images is still possible. Radar images can see also something below a coverage.
Just like civilian satellites, spy satellites and military satellites in general are launched into space using rockets and must be registered with the United Nations. Therefore, it is possible to track them.
There is just a category of very specialized amateur observers, tens of people, very able from a technical point of view, that also using binoculars at the beginning, then optical telescopes, and now also CCD cameras, are able to acquire a lot of information without being an intelligence system by themselves. So it's not possible really to maintain the secret on this system. The timing is known, the orbit is known, and so on. Of course, what we don't know is that unless, of course, we have some very precise and detailed classified information, we don't know the performances of this system.
Unfortunately, we don't have time to go into more detail on how to track a military satellite. But if you're interested in doing so, you should have a look at the blog SatTrackCam by Marco Langbroek, a Dutch professor at TU Delft who has extensive knowledge in this field. But if it's true that tracking military satellites isn't too difficult, we should also note that some satellites have launched into orbit without being declared. On the 25th of December 2013, a Russian rocket launched 3 telecommunication satellites intended to integrate with the Rodnik constellation. 5 months later, Moscow informed the UN that the launch had actually included 4 satellites, not 3. The 4th satellite was identified and classified as Cosmos 2491. Initially mistaken for debris, it was later identified and confirmed to be a satellite. In May 2014, another Russian rocket launched 3 telecommunication satellites officially registered as military. However, this time, an object initially considered debris from the payload fairing was later classified as a microsatellite known as Cosmos 2499. Both Cosmos 2491 and Cosmos 2499 eventually exploded, the first in 2019 and the second in 2023. Some American analysts have suggested that these Cosmos satellites may have been prototypes for a larger Russian anti-satellite program, a view that Russia has not confirmed. Maybe after hearing Anselmo's explanations and this little anecdote, you might be thinking that military satellites are completely detached from our daily lives and something very difficult to grasp. But actually, they're closer to us than you might think.
The GPS, the Global Positioning System, was born for military application to provide missiles a precise reference system to be very accurate when targeting their target.
The United States launched the GPS in 1973 and employed it for the first time in a war setting during the first Gulf War in 1991. To become independent of US technology, other countries started creating their own GPS systems. Russia has GLONASS, China has Beidou, and the EU has Galileo. So, as you can see, the categorization of satellites as civilian and military is quite flawed and difficult to grasp.
In the first decades of space activities, there was a clear distinction. There were civilian programs and military programs. And they were generally managed by different agencies, by different communities. But in any case, the system, the satellites were quite different, were very much specialized. Now, with the development of new technologies, with the development of small satellites, of satellite constellations, and so on, this distinction has no more sense. Now, many systems can be used both for military and civilian applications. For instance, communications. Let's say the Starlink constellation. The constellation, of course, has mainly a civilian application, a commercial application, just providing internet data connection to users around the world. But as we see in the headline of the newspaper every day during international crisis, of course, this kind of internet communication is also critical from a political and from a military point of view. This is the reason why Starlink provided internet to Ukraine during the war, could provide connection to Iranian people during the uprising in the Iranian country.
Starlink, the communications satellite constellation owned by Elon Musk's company SpaceX, was primarily invented for commercial purposes. However, it has a dual function, as it can be and is indeed employed by armed forces. For example, after the cyber attack on Viasat mentioned at the beginning of the episode, Starlink provided the Ukrainian government with access to its technology to maintain internet connectivity. Of course, this doesn't mean that all satellites orbiting Earth are military satellites. Rather, it demonstrates that some satellites can serve both civilian and military functions. And compared to the past, many more actors are now operating in space, making boundaries between commercial activities, military use, space defense, security, and scientific research more complex to define.
Actually, defense and security is the major market for Earth observation.
You're listening to Francisco Vilhena de Cunha, CEO of Geosat, a Portuguese company designing and operating Earth observation satellites. Like other companies, Geosat satellites have multiple functions and applications. They monitor agriculture, support urban planning, provide near real-time images for emergency management, and also deliver high-resolution imagery and data for space defense.
What satellites do, and there's observation satellites in particular, what they do is that they provide eyes on sight. They allow us to see what is happening on the ground in an untampered, systematic, and persistent manner. And so for defense and security right now, satellites are critical to provide situational awareness. We can say that nowadays there are no more the effect of surprise, doing something that no one has seen, because with satellites we can monitor borders, we can monitor force accumulation in the borders or in the main roads, for instance.
Earth observation satellites can monitor from above what is happening on the ground, offering what is defined as situational awareness. They can, for instance, monitor countries' borders, track ships, and observe critical conflict zones. But like any other satellites in space, they can be exposed to threats.
We see there's strong disturbances in the region of Ukraine, Russia as well, and that significantly impacts satellite operations, because it's not only position, is that the GPS satellites, they provide the timing. And when we have an Earth observation satellite, what we say to the satellite is that you will take a picture at hour 23 minute 12 second 20. So if the timing is not the correct, the acquisition will not be done in the right place. So it's position, navigation, and timing. So this jamming can have a substantial impact on day-to-day operations of satellites.
Jamming is a type of anti-satellite attack that uses radio signals to interfere with satellite communications. Other hazards include spoofing, which involves sending fake signals to trick a satellite or receiver, and stalking, which refers to the unauthorized tracking of a satellite. In the case of Geosat, the threat comes from specific actors.
Major sources of jamming, if we look at the interferences that we are getting, is from the region of Ukraine. What we can tell you is that we are a company from Portugal. We are based both in Portugal and Spain. We fully align our activity with European interests and then with NATO interests. So, of course, that institutions, countries that are not aligned with the geostrategic views of Europe and NATO would consider that could be a good idea to spoof or to jam a Geosat satellite.
These threats once again reveal that space is not a neutral, purely scientific domain. It's a political space, a battlefield. And satellites need to take this into account and implement some protective measures. For instance, this is how Geosat satellites are trying to resist jamming.
Most of the jamming comes from Earth, okay? And the signal that we get from GPS satellites usually is from above. So we can get a protection below the satellite, radiation protection, in order to try to be able to be a little bit more protected against this jamming. Then is redundancy, having different types of communication systems, having redundant positioning systems, having what we can call also inertial systems that even when there is no satellite navigation, tell us more or less where we are and what can be the timing. So thinking about what we call the failure tree and see what can fail and what can be the workaround on that.
But if space is a battlefield, then starting a business in the context of space defense requires something crucial: transparency about which side you are on.
We understand that companies need to be very clear in terms of what's their purpose and where they stand. And what happens is that when a company starts going into defense, many things change because it's no more selling to everyone, getting investment from every type of fund. It means that you need to make sure that you'll always be free to make the right decisions, and that you do not put yourself in a situation in which you'll be controlled by conflicting interests. And so you need to be very clear and very vocal about who you are and where are you. Of course, wars are everything but simple. And we understand that wars are not to be managed in the social media nor in the media itself. So what we do is that we align with institutions. For instance, we align with the Portuguese government guidelines, we align with the Spanish government guidelines, we align with the European Commission and other European institutions' guidelines. This is what we abide for. And we have been very clear in terms of that. That means that in many deals we don't even enter nor try to enter. That's true. We're losing business, yes. But that we understand that is a consequence and needs to be a consequence of working in defense ethically.
Francisco Vilhena de Cunha has mentioned several actors: the European Commission, the Portuguese and Spanish governments, NATO. But how do European countries compare to other major players in space technology when it comes to space defense?
Commissioner, I want to start with the announcement that you made at this conference, opening it, regarding the fact that the European Union member states now have access to European-made secure and encrypted satellite communication system, GovSatCom. How does this step help Europe seek its strategic autonomy and independence? How important is this step?
You're listening to an extract of Euronews' TV programme, The Europe Conversation. In this episode, my colleague Sasha Vakulina is interviewing the European Commissioner for Defence and Space, Andrius Kubilius.
Well, definitely it's important. We promise that we shall do that, for quite a period of time, because this is part of our long-term strategy to develop European secure satellite communication system, so-called IRIS², which, we are really moving ahead. But realistically, we know, all of us, that this new constellation can be operational somewhere around of 2029. So not to have an empty space now for several years, especially when geopolitical challenges and threats are so much coming from different sides. Definitely, we need to develop some precursor capabilities for secure satellite communication, and that is what we did with GovSatCom.
During the 18th European Space Conference, which took place in Brussels on the 27th and 28th of January, Kubilius announced that GovSatCom had begun operations the week before. This development was widely discussed at the event due to its significance for European space defence. But what exactly is GovSatCom?
So GovSatCom is exactly what the name says, is governmental satellite communication. It's actually the European Union's secure satellite communication capability and a very important first step to our secured connectivity capability in Europe. The objective is to provide to the 27 member states in the European Union access to secure communications.
This is Rodrigo da Costa, Executive Director of the EU Agency for the Space Programme, known as EUSPA. GovSatCom is neither a satellite nor a constellation of satellites. It's a program that uses existing satellites to provide secure and encrypted communication capabilities to its member states.
So GovSatCom, the program, the activity, is built upon the basic principle of pooling and sharing. So we have few member states in the European Union that have a capability to do secured satellite communications. And we have a large customer base. The customer base are all the EU27 that want to use this capability. So basically through GovSatCom, we are creating this pooling and sharing mechanism that allows those that are willing to give to make it accessible to those that are willing to use. So it is really a European project and in the European Union spirit.
France, Greece, Italy, Luxembourg, and Spain already have secure satellite communication systems. With GovSatCom, these countries are now pooling the capacity of their existing satellites into a shared EU system. This allows other EU member states to meet their communication needs without depending on non-EU countries or commercial satellites.
The advantage of the GovSatCom is that it really provides secure communication capability to everyone. So it generalizes, it commonalizes a capability for those that want to share.
Da Costa explained that all member states will decide how to use this program.
Each member state that is using GovSatCom nominates a competent GovSatCom authority. And within their remits, they decide on how to use it.
But overall, this program has three main application domains: crisis management, border and maritime surveillance, and management of key infrastructures, including diplomatic communication networks. GovSatCom is structured in different phases, but by 2029, it's expected to integrate with the almost 300 satellites in the IRIS² constellation.
Today, GovSatCom is connecting users to existing resources, as I mentioned. Later on, it will connect to the IRIS² constellation. IRIS² is Europe's secure connectivity constellation.
After the geonavigation network Galileo and the Earth observation constellation Copernicus, the EU is now working on IRIS², a constellation of telecommunication satellites. IRIS² is quite similar to Elon Musk's Starlink, as it's also a network of multiple telecommunication satellites. However, it'll have fewer satellites than Starlink, and its purpose will not be commercial.
GovSatCom and IRIS² will certainly have a key role in supporting European actors, European member states, in their different missions where they require the secure communication capability.
IRIS² is not yet a reality. It's a project the EU is working towards, but one that, according to Commissioner Kubilius, will provide the EU with a major asset in space defense.
The Americans really are providing us with what we call strategic enablers. And we are quite heavily dependent. And first of all on space services, but also on some, what we can call very, very material services like air refueling, for example, or heavy airlift capabilities and so on. So we need to develop those capabilities. So that is why really IRIS², I always repeat what I hear from experts. When we shall have IRIS², it will be better than Starlink.
That's it for today's episode of Euronews Tech Talks. We hope you didn't get too scared about what's going on up there in space, but rather learned something new and thought-provoking. We'll meet you back here in 2 weeks to answer your questions on space defense with a European space expert. Make sure you don't miss our Q&A. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, James Thomas. This series was created by Marta Rodriguez Martinez. This episode was written and produced by Alice Carnevali. The theme music is by Leo Lebrun. Sound editing and sound mixing is by Joanne Breton. Our editor-in-chief is Niaz Samadizada. Thanks to Cecilia Koparanyan for her help during the recording of the interviews. If you want to learn more about satellites and space defense, read The Great Game of Satellites by Frediano Finucci. Parts of this episode are inspired by the stories Finucci shares in his book. If you aren't already, you can listen to the series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Castbox, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you're enjoying the podcast, please consider leaving us a positive review and, of course, sharing it. Thanks for listening.